Jacob Raymond. He was 6 pounds of perfect baby sweetness. And when I saw him, I thought, wow, he really looks like his sister.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a place where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter.
And I'm Lee. We are grateful you joined us today. Please note that this is a story of loss and has triggers.
Thanks to our lost parents who are willing to be vulnerable and share their children with us.
If you're listening to this podcast, just know that on our YouTube channel there are pictures and videos that are related to the stories that are being shared.
Subscribe and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us. Becky, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about your sweet Jacob. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and how your family looks right now and at the time of when Jacob was born.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, we're so happy to have you on.
Yeah, I'm really grateful. So my family, I'm very blessed that I have a wonderful husband. His name is David. We have been married for about 7 years. He and his family are fifth generation organic farmers here in Iowa.
Wow.
And yes, he's wonderful and works very hard, and he is quite literally saving the planet. So thank you for that. He's wonderful, very kind, very supportive, my best friend. And then we have two amazing daughters. Our first girl is Maggie. She is 5. She's in kindergarten this year. She is a quintessential first child, and we love her so much. And then we also have our sweet pea Ellie. She is 3 years old, and she is full of life and words and feelings, and it's just such a blessing to see the two of them together. I'm just beyond happy that I get to watch them grow up together.
That is so wonderful. That you guys have a very full life. And
We do.
Before we got on this call, it was pretty great because Becky just said, "Oh yeah, my husband's out farming right now." I'm like, "Oh, he is." It was so. I was like, "Oh, that's so great." I think that is pretty neat. Did both of you guys grow up in Iowa then?
So I am a very proud Nebraskan.
Oh.
and a lot of people will think that Nebraska and Iowa are similar, which they are, but for those of us from here, it's different. So David was born and raised here where we live near in western Iowa. Mm-hmm. And I actually grew up in western Nebraska, like 20 or 30 minutes from Wyoming. So I'm definitely from the other end of the state.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah. And you guys, did you meet in college, or was it kind of a happenstance thing?
You know, we actually met when we were both living up in Minnesota in a bar,
Oh.
Yeah. So it worked. We were both up there for different reasons. I was up there for school, and he had moved up there and was living with friends, and we just happened to run into each other.
That is perfect. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And do you guys, you sound extremely busy. What do you guys like to do in your spare time as a family or on your own?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really, really like to be outside when we can and when the weather allows, and just out and moving around. I participate in frequent dance parties with the girls. That's
Those
fun.
Are the best.
Yeah, it is really fun. And even, we live about 40 minutes from Omaha. That's actually where I work, so I commute as well. But when we can, we just go there for the day and get some nice lunch and shop and do whatever. It's really just low-key family time is really important to us.
That sounds perfect. That sounds really idyllic, actually. I was like, oh, sounds lovely. And at the time of this recording, when was Jacob born?
Yeah, so Jacob was born on May 4th, 2021. So we are about 10 months out from that.
So still very new, still very raw.
Yes.
I do love the fact that he was born on May 4th. May the 4th be with you.
Yes. I'm happy you picked up on that. Yeah. We are, my husband more so than me, but we are a Star Wars house.
Awesome.
And we have a lot of baby Yoda Jacob things that just all came together. So
that's so sweet.
It's pretty special.
Wonderful. Well, tell me a little bit about, so you have your two girls
Mhm.
and they seem to be kind of well spaced apart. Were you guys planning on having Jacob? Were you planning on getting pregnant? Was that something that was part of the your long-term family plans?
Yes, it absolutely was. It was one of the first conversations David and I had when we were dating and engaged that we've always thought our number was going to be three.
Oh,
And he and I aren't old by any means, but we're also not young. So we were trying to be careful and strategic about when we had our children,
gotcha.
spacing them apart for sanity, but also making sure, they can all enjoy being the same age and growing up together.
Yeah.
So this is very, very much a part of our plan. We are beyond fortunate that we don't struggle with becoming pregnant. So
Okay.
I'm grateful for those fertility blessings. The, we were considering getting pregnant in the middle of the pandemic. So there's always just life circumstances and thinking about everything going on to consider. And we've always been strongly convicted that we wanted three children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you guys started trying and it
Yeah.
just worked
Yeah.
out?
Yes, they certainly did. It was the end of August 2020 when I found out I was pregnant, and we were excited. I am, anyone who knows me, some may say I am organized and efficient and very much like to be a planner. So my mind immediately starts going to dates and timelines and what this will look like, and just all the plans kind of lay out before you.
Yes.
So, I mean, one of the most exciting parts of becoming pregnant is sharing this good news with family and friends. And our second daughter, Ellie, her birthday is on September 27th. So my parents were in town for Ellie's birthday, and David's parents came over, and it was really, really low key and nice and quiet. It was our family and the grandparents. And I had my mom say, like, oh, here's another present for Ellie, just open it. Well, it turns out it was the positive pregnancy test. So it was just really exciting to share that news with all of them at the same time. It
Yeah.
was really, really special. And I mean, to be honest, for context, there's so much symmetry about all of Jacob's story, but unfortunately, less than 10 minutes later, we learned that a beloved family member, David's uncle,
Hmm.
had died of COVID.
Oh,
So we're on this really big high of, hey, here comes Jacob. We didn't know he was Jacob at the time. And
hmm.
then 10 minutes later, we get this news. So
Oh,
thinking about this symmetry of life and death, there was a lot of feelings at that party.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm assuming your daughters were just super, super excited about.
Oh, they were so happy. They were so happy. It was so sweet to see it. Because when Ellie, our second, was born, Maggie was about three, right?
Hmm.
So 3-year-olds can understand things about as much as they can. But I mean, Maggie was much more kind of engaged and understanding and asking questions. And then Ellie just kind of tagged along with her sister's questions. And it was fun to see them try to make sense of it together.
Oh, that is so wonderful. It's, yeah, to
Yeah.
see that
Yeah.
excitement.
Yeah, it was just really sweet. And I remember that Maggie said, well, this baby's going to be a boy because daddy's all by himself in the house.
She's really thinking about dad.
Yeah, which is so true. I mean, even our cat is a girl. So, like, David is outnumbered. That's fair.
Yes,
So, yeah.
completely.
Hmm.
So you guys got, so you are pregnant, and how did your doctor's visits look? I know
Yeah.
that this was in the middle of the pandemic, and
Yeah.
you guys are a little bit farther away from kind of a bigger, bigger city center. Do you have a doctor nearby, that type of thing? Were you able to go in and get checked up and all that fun stuff?
Yes. In terms of the doctor's visits, this was the same team I had worked with for both previous pregnancies. And as I mentioned, we're about 40 minutes outside of the city, but I
Mhm.
also work in the city. So it was really convenient for me to get to doctor's appointments. Really, no problem at all. And
Perfect.
that had been the case with the first two. So I was happy to continue working with the same team. A big element that's going to come into this story later is that my mom is actually a certified nurse midwife.
Oh,
And prior to that, she has had multiple nursing degrees, but she started out as a labor and delivery nurse. So my entire life, I remember being around my mom's colleagues and coworkers and just like babies and being on like labor and delivery units. So just like it was something that felt comfortable and very secure to me. So I was fortunate to work with the midwife team. So they were familiar with me at this point, considering
Hmm.
this was what my third pregnancy in probably about 5 years.
Yeah.
And doctors' routines were very straightforward, uncomplicated. They were going so well, in fact, that unlike my first two pregnancies, I didn't feel a lot of symptoms in the first trimester.
Oh,
And I said, "Oh, this is great, but this is strange." And I remember going in one day and I'm like, "Can I please just have an ultrasound? I know everything's okay, but can you just give me a little bit of reassurance?" And they were like, "Yeah, no problem." And everything went fine.
okay.
So that was really, really smooth. Another aspect of my pregnancies is for all three of them, I have had gestational diabetes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a conundrum because we're not quite sure why. Like my mom didn't have it. There's not a huge family history for it or anything, but it's just something that I have.
Okay.
So I have had an extra component of always just tracking and monitoring my sugars.
Yeah.
And even with Jacob, with it being the third, like I started even earlier at like 15 weeks maybe. So, but fortunately, I've been able to handle that with diet and exercise for all the pregnancies. So while like I had to be really careful about my intake, it wasn't a huge hardship. So
And it was kind of like I've done this before in two other
yeah,
pregnancies, and I am familiar with maybe the risks and such that may be
yes, and
associated
all
with
of
it.
that.
Okay.
And I'm like, let me get that glucometer out
Yeah.
again and start doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but that was okay and that was expected.
And
So
so you were first trimester was less sick as you have been in
yeah,
the past. You
yeah,
were kind of worried. You got the ultrasound. Everything checked out just fine.
yeah.
Are you? So you're going in pretty regularly. Were you? So were you guys planning on getting the? Obviously the anatomy scan, just checking everything out, making sure he's looking good.
Yes, absolutely. We did do the genetic testing this time
Oh,
too,
you
just
did.
because of our
Okay.
age.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting because with the first two pregnancies, we did not know the sex. We didn't know what we were having until they were born, which
Oh,
was really fun.
yeah.
It was so hard when the genetic counselor called and said everything looks great. Do you want to know the sex? And I was like, ah! Like I almost wanted to say yes, but I'm like, no, no. And then by the time we got to the 20-week anatomy scan, as you mentioned, COVID, like I was by myself for all of these
Oh,
appointments. Part of it was because they allowed a visitor, but David was farming 40 minutes away and everything felt pretty routine, so it was fine.
yeah.
And I remember turning my head at the anatomy scan when they said they were looking at the sex. But I'll be honest, I peeked my eyes a little bit, and I think it was right at the perfect time where they were determining the sex. And I was like, oh, I cannot deny what that is. I definitely think we're having a boy, which was really, really exciting, but also like, oh gosh, my husband and I decided we weren't going to do this, and now I know. So what am I going to do with that information?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I knew Jacob was Jacob at 20 weeks, which was actually really sweet and different. And in retrospect, I'm so happy I had that and I
Hmm.
could call him by his name because I bonded in my first two pregnancies, but I didn't know if I was having a boy or a girl.
Right.
So I think it helped the relationship considering, how it turned out.
Yeah. Did you end up telling your husband that you knew?
Nope. Yeah, he knows now, to
Okay,
be
I was
clear.
gonna say, is this a
Like
confessional right now?
it was definitely a confessional. I'm like, so there's this piece of information I want you to know. And, you know, I'm not sure if I would have been this gracious in his position, but he's like, I actually really like that you knew. I think that that's really, really nice that you and him could talk to each other in that way.
That that's very gracious of him.
Yeah. Yeah. I might have had a different response.
Okay, so you are going along. You had your anatomy scan. He looked great. Like
He looked
there was no
fantastic.
issues. You were not concerned at all about
Nope.
him. They weren't concerned about him at all.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit more about the rest of the pregnancy. How did it go? Because we will come to find out, like, as you start getting into the third trimester, is where things kind of turn differently.
Yeah. Yeah. The rest of the pregnancy was flying by. It was smooth. The times of days where he were kicking and moving, I could guess and predict, and he was there, and I would have everyone. It's like he was very active,
Mm,
which was really reassuring. And having this not be my first pregnancy, it was also nice because up until this point, I had all the reassurance that I'm like, yeah, this is going how it's supposed to. This is unremarkable. And I'm really grateful for that. And as the third trimester approached, you get like it's a little hard to sleep and you get a
Mm-hmm.
bit more uncomfortable. But fortunately, I knew different ways to manage that. I mean, so things were going well. There really wasn't a whole lot to talk about. With having gestational diabetes, they like to do stress tests,
Yes.
kind of starting 36 weeks
Mm.
all the way until 40 weeks.
And is that like
And
once a week or a couple times a week?
mhm,
Okay.
once a week.
Once a week. Okay.
Yeah, and his weight was tracking just fine. My sugars were fine. He was measuring where he needed to. He was head down at like 30 weeks.
Mm.
So, when babies flip, you just feel pregnant in a different way.
Yes.
I remember thinking like, man, this kid is really low. So, but that was okay. He was where he needed to be. He was in position at 30 weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah.
So tell me what happened after
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So, where this all starts culminating. So, Friday, this is a Friday. Jacob was born on a Tuesday. Friday, April 30th, also Maggie's birthday, which is fun.
Oh, okay.
I had my 36-week appointment. We weren't doing stress tests at that point because everything was still fine, but I was scheduled to come in like the following Wednesday to do it. We went in, listened to the heartbeat. Everything was fine. The appointment maybe lasted 10 minutes. We had scheduled an induction date just because they don't like women with gestational diabetes to really go overdue. Which was fine because my first was born exactly on her due date, and my second one was born at like 40 weeks and 4 days. So I'm like, if I have to get induced, no big deal. But we had a date set,
And
which
was
was
it
April 27th, or
okay?
excuse me, May 27th.
May 27th. So it would have been
Yeah.
around 40 weeks, 39
Yeah,
weeks?
right at 40
Right at
weeks.
40 weeks. Okay.
Mhm. So that was all set up. We were just kind of talking about what to plan for the next month, any questions about induction. Everything was fine. I left. This is Friday night and doing birthday stuff. I remember I ran to like Target to get some groceries and stuff, and then I came home, and that weekend was really, really busy. We were doing some stuff for Maggie's birthday on that Saturday. And then that following Sunday was my nephew's first communion, and the weather was beautiful. We had a celebration out at the farm. All of our families were together. My sister-in-law's parents were having the sweetest conversations with me about like, oh, this baby's coming soon. How is everything going? It was a beautiful day. A beautiful day. It's kind of hard to think about in retrospect, but I'm also really, really grateful we had that solace because we didn't know what was coming.
Yeah.
So that day was really nice. I remember lying in bed that Sunday night. At this point, David and I were sleeping in separate beds because when you're this pregnant and uncomfortable, like, whatever, we're in separate beds.
Yeah.
And it's occurring to me, I'm like, he's not really moving. Like, I can't feel him move. And I remember switching positions a couple times and being like, oh gosh, like, let me just try to sleep. Don't worry. Don't go into panic mode. Just see how you feel in the morning. Something pretty significant that happened that night was like April and May is a really crucial time for farming,
Mm.
for the growth of plant. Like, you just really need it to have a successful crop. And there had been a huge lack of moisture, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, I wrote it down in the story at like 12:40 a.m. This is coming into Monday morning. There was a monstrous clap of thunder, like out of nowhere. It just like it gives me chills still thinking about it. And I remember texting David because I'm like, hey, do you need help? Are the girls okay? I was like, there's no way this didn't just wake them up. And he texted me back. He's like, no, they're all quiet up here. Everything's fine. And then we get this much needed, like
Mm.
quite literally financially saving rain.
Yeah.
So, but just that clap of thunder and thinking about what was going on, like, oh gosh, it's still really, 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 it woke me up and I was already worried and I was like, wow, like something is happening. So I remember waking up the next morning and being like, oh my gosh, he's still not moving. And we were busy and I was needing to get to work, and the girls' daycare is actually closer to where I work. So it was always like getting the girls in the car, getting them where they need to go, dropping them off, and then getting to work. And I was really busy at 8 o'clock. I don't think I mentioned, but my profession is I'm a clinical psychologist,
Okay.
and I had an 8 a.m. patient. And I remember like drinking a bunch of orange juice before, and I'm like, okay, drink some orange juice, move around, stand up, like focus on this 8 o'clock session. But even then, I was like, oh, he's still not moving. So at this point, I'm getting really worried. And it wasn't that he's not moving, like his movements aren't like tracking, like there was quite literally nothing.
Mm.
And this was nothing I'd ever felt before. And just all the alarm bells in my mind start going off, but I'm trying really, really hard to be calm.
Yeah.
So as soon as that session was done, this is like 9 a.m., I called the doctor's office and said, like, I need to come in immediately. I think something's really wrong. They called me back. They got me in like a half an hour later. I load everything up. I drive there.
Mhm.
As I'm sitting in the waiting room, I remember texting the person I was trying to get daycare established with for Jacob. Like we were trying to work on logistics. So like even though I'm really scared up until this entire point, I'm like, here's our plan. Here's what we're doing. Like figure out what's going on. Like try to be calm. This is really scary, but you're going to get answers. So the self-talk I was doing was just harrowing. And I called David when I was driving to the hospital, and I hadn't told him I wasn't feeling any movement at this point because I really didn't want to send off alarm bells. But at this point, I'm like, hey, here's the situation. I'm going in. I'll call you.
Okay.
So we go in. They take me to the stress test room, which, by the way, I've still never been in. So this was my first time. And I sit down, and I think the ultrasound technician was confused. She's like, oh, you're here for your stress test. And I'm a little impatient. I'm like, no, I'm here because my baby's not moving and I need some answers. So I sit, and it's the chair at this point. It's not like an ultrasound where you're laying back. You're sitting up in a chair.
Yep.
They get the jelly and everything and put the Doppler on me. And I look at the screen. You're supposed to see movement.
Yeah.
You're supposed to see the heartbeat. Nothing. And I just remember, like, this is where it all starts getting fuzzy because I go into shock, right? And the technician says, do you have an appointment today? And I said, no. And then she just left the room, which I'm not upset with her, but I'm just going into full-fledged panic mode. So I'm sitting in there by myself. It could have been 25 minutes. In reality, it was maybe 5 minutes, but like the longest and worst 5 minutes of my life, or so I thought. And I see the door open, and it's my midwife, but it's also the high-risk OB-GYN because I had to have a little bit of check-ins with them just because I had gestational diabetes.
Right.
And I see them walk in, and they just look at me, and I just start crying. It's, your world is like shattering. And they hadn't actually said the words to me, and I think they thought I knew. So they start talking to me, and I'm like, what happened? Like, tell me. Like, I needed to hear the words. And like I remember the high risk OB, she got upset and like said something to the technician. She's like, this is why you don't leave people in the room alone.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
And like I'm not mad at her because it was stressful and very upsetting, but I was like, cool. So I've been sitting here, and then they told me. And I just remember saying, like, we're so close. We're so close. I was 36 and 6 that day. So when he delivered, I was exactly 37 weeks. And I couldn't compute. But the one thing I remember thinking is, I am about to make some phone calls right now and literally blow up everyone's life. I didn't want to call my husband and tell him this. I really, really didn't. But I did. And he can tell something's wrong. He just answers and he's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, the baby died. That's all I could say. And he just, of course, is devastated and goes into panic mode and just starts asking all of these questions. And I'm like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. So he hung up. The next person I called was my mom. Because with her being a midwife, she has been with me for Maggie and Ellie's birth.
Right.
And was planning on being there for Jacob too. And keep in mind, my parents live about 7 hours away in a different time zone.
Oh.
And like, unfortunately, in my family, we are not strangers to grief. So when you get a phone call during a time of day you're not supposed to get a phone call, we're immediately worried. And she was so sweet and kind when she answered. She's like, "Hey, honey, how are you?" And I'm like, "Mom, the baby died." And she just goes silent. And like, she felt super bad and apologized. She got like, went into planning mode and like hung
Yeah.
up on me and then called back like 30 seconds later. She's like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I was like, "No, it's okay." And she's like, "I'm getting your dad. We're getting in the car. Just like, we're on our way." So then they take me to the ultrasound room to try to see what's going on. I did not even want to look at the screen. It was upsetting. It was painful. And I'm just laying there like, I can't process. How can you process something like that?
Yeah.
And then I had to call work, of course, because I was like, "Oh, I'm just running to the doctor's office. I'll be back in a little bit." No. And then like everyone's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm telling them, and it's just the utter shock and like devastation. And like my heart's breaking. Everyone's heart is breaking. We're trying to figure out what's going on. And I'm like, I cannot make sense of this. So David's mom, Maria, my mother-in-law, drives him into Omaha. Like I said, it's about 40 minutes. Of course, there's all these not limitations, very much needed rules around how many people can be with you due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
So I had to go downstairs with the midwife and get him and just bring him upstairs and like go through another room and then like sit in this thing because it's like a whole bunch of patient protocols. And then they sit down and just start explaining to us our options. And they said, just to prepare you, oftentimes parents do not get answers as to what happened. And I was like, okay, because they start asking all these questions that you can't even make sense of. And I knew that like I didn't sometimes I think women are given whatever option they can to wait, decide when they're ready to deliver, this and that. But I mean, once at least for me, once I knew he wasn't alive, it was really, really hard to be pregnant.
Yes.
I didn't even want to look at myself in the mirror and
Yeah.
like see my bump or any of that because it was so heartbreaking. And I knew I'm like, okay, I kind of want to come in tonight because by then my mom will be here and they can come with me. So let's go home and have a day and tell the girls and call family and do what we need to. So David picked me up. I went to work to get my stuff, which in hindsight, like, I don't need my stuff. Like, why did I go? It's fine. And I called my boss and like, "I'm just coming to get my stuff. Like, I don't want to see anyone." And she said, "Fine, like it's sitting for you here. Like, we don't have to talk." So we go home. My mother-in-law had gone to pick up the girls. They didn't know. They're just like, "Oh, great, grandma's here." We go home, they're eating lunch. And David and I were kind of trying to plan as to how to tell them.
Yeah.
And we just sat down and I just told him. And Maggie just immediately starts crying. I think she's confused and not knowing what to do. And Ellie's just watching all of us be so upset. So that's what we did. It was nice to be able to be home with the girls because they're sweet and kind and just it's the normalcy we need. That whole day feels like a huge fog.
Yeah.
My parents got here. It was right around the time we put the girls to bed. My parents got here around, I don't know, 7:30 or 8 at night. Keep in mind, like, what? This is like 10 hours at this point
Yeah.
of trying to make sense of it. So they got here, and then my mom and David and my dad stayed with the girls, and then we drove back to Omaha to go to the hospital. Fortunately, the midwife I had worked with was on call that night, and she said, "I'll be here. If you plan on coming in tonight, just show up when you're ready."
Okay. Okay.
So we did. I was scheduled to be induced, which is something that hasn't happened before, but I wasn't too concerned about it. I'm just like in so much shock. And the person who checked us in at the hospital, probably the sweetest man alive, like asked, like, "Hey, where are you going?" And I'm like, "Labor and delivery." And he's like, "Oh, congratulations. This is so exciting." And I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going to tell him. And I just said thank you and was just walking around in a daze.
Yeah.
But it's just like, this is supposed to be happy.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be exciting.
Exactly.
And like, I am fortunate to have two previously smooth, wonderful, amazing, life-changing births. I knew what this was supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And I knew I wasn't going to get that. And I forgot earlier that day, I start thinking in my head, I'm like, how in the world am I going to do this? How am I going to deliver this child? Like, you start thinking about the emotional toll this is going to take on top of the physical toll.
Yeah.
And so that was in my thought all day, but I was reassured, or in my mind all day, but I was reassured because I had David and I had my mom. And my mom, I mean, I need her, and this is also her field of expertise.
Yeah.
Like, she will help me.
Mm-hmm.
So we get there, I go in, they check me in. I found out later, someone told me this. A lot of maternity units will put the white rose on your door
Oh,
on the
okay.
outside of it.
Yeah.
So everyone at the hospital knows, like, this is a loss. I think it's what it signifies.
Yeah.
I didn't even see that, but my mom and David told me about it later. So they were very kind to put us in a room away from a lot of the other actively laboring moms, so we wouldn't have to hear it.
Yeah.
So the nurse is really kind. They come in, they start me on I can't even remember. They give me some sort of drug first to see if I start kind of dilating on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And then they ended up giving me the I think it's there's a specific
Pitocin,
word.
probably.
Yeah, I think it was Pitocin. I have it written down somewhere. It doesn't matter. But they gave me the medicine. Oh, it was Cytotec. That's
Oh,
what they
side
gave me.
effect. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they gave me Cytotec 2 separate times, and we're just kind of checking on me. I got there at about 9:30 is when they started the whole process.
Okay.
So they gave me the Cytotec vaginally, and then I knew I was going to want an epidural. Like, I had one with the first 2 births, and I knew, like, this time too, like, I'm already in so much emotional pain. If we can help with the physical pain, like, let's do anything we can.
That's great. That's
Yeah,
so good.
yeah. And they were very kind. Of course, they tested us all for COVID, which we didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get my mom as the second visitor in there because she's licensed as a midwife, and I just sent her license in, and they basically said she's here for birth support,
Awesome.
which is so needed. I was like, I couldn't have done this without her, and David needed to be
Yeah.
there. So
Yes,
I'm just really
exactly.
grateful for that. So the hospital was very kind and gracious in trying to accommodate this. I got in the bath for a little bit to see how I was doing. Then they gave me the Cytotec. And then probably, oh gosh, this was probably at about 2 in the morning. I remember just saying, okay, I'm ready for the epidural. By the time they came in and gave me the epidural, like, I was ready to go. Like, the epidural was in, and I was trying to rest probably in between 3 and 4 a.m.
Yeah, because you have been going for a long time without much rest. And then,
Yeah,
of
I hadn't
course, on
slept.
top of that, the emotional, like, burden, like how
Yeah,
heavy it is.
yeah. And it's just such a haze, like,
Yeah.
it's such a shock. I mean, my mom had just driven across the state with no sleep, then like, David was in a daze. We were all just shell shocked. And I remember starting to feel the contractions, which was nice. And luckily, I became kind of like fully effaced and dilated pretty quickly.
Oh, okay.
What I learned later is they gave me more medicine than they typically would for a live baby because they have to be careful. But unfortunately, in this case, they didn't with Jacob. So I think, kind of from like a mercy perspective, they're like, let's give her this dose, see how it goes.
Yeah.
I wasn't progressing super quickly, and the midwife is in another room assisting another mom, delivering mom. But I remember, okay, so I'm sitting up, I'm getting the epidural placed. My stupid alarm goes off to wake up, right? Like, I get up really, really early because I have to commute,
Yeah.
which is actually kind of interesting. And I made a joke. I'm like, well, certainly not getting up right now. I'm already up. But I remember in the mornings when I would be up and moving around is when I talked to Jacob the most. Like, that was kind of our time of the day.
Oh,
So as painful as this was, I'm comforted to know that, like, oh, hey, he and I have a schedule.
yeah.
This is what's happening. So I laid down and tried to rest. And of my 3 births, I don't know if it's because the epidural didn't have a whole lot of time or if I was just like in a different altered state. I felt this birth. I wasn't in pain, but I felt this so much more than the first
Oh,
2,
really?
which I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
Like, I need as much of this experience as I can remember. And I remember lying on my side, and I must have been making certain noises or something because my mom kept saying to the nurse, she's like, please check her, please check her, please check her. And the nurse wasn't quite sure what to do because I hadn't really been progressing. So my mom goes to check me, and she says, Becky, he's here. And she's like, you need to start pushing. And I panic because I didn't want to do it. So I am lying on my side. I didn't even turn around because my mom's like, he is here. You need to push. So it was shocking and abrupt. And I remember laying there trying to push him like, this is the worst moment of my life. This is so awful. And like David's with me and the nurse is there. It's all happening so quick. Like my mom had to grab a pair of gloves and like throw them on, and she's like, okay, he's here. The nurse was trying to call the poor midwife. He's like trying to run. Like it just happened really quickly. And I didn't have to push for very long. He came out. I remember my mom saying, I knew it. And I was like, what are you saying? And she goes, honey, his cord had a knot. She's like, here's what happened. And she explained the whole thing to me right there in that moment. And part of me was still like, maybe they got it wrong. Maybe I'll hear him cry. Maybe he's actually okay. And just like the utter silence in the room was awful. And I see him, and like my husband's looking at him, and they put him in the warmer and they bring him to me, and I see him, and I just immediately started saying, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm so, so, so sorry. I couldn't get you to the end. And I was just in so much shock at that point, but I was like, Jacob, we were so close. I'm just so sorry. So then everything starts happening after that. And like, I was so happy I get a hold of him. And this is kind of hard for me to say because it wasn't what I was expecting. It was also really, really hard too.
Yes.
I wanted to hold him, but I wanted like some space too because I could not compute that this was my child who was supposed to be alive. I just couldn't. So, I mean, the nurse, the midwife that comes in, and she's like, I was trying so hard to be here for you. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, I had who I needed. It was my mom, David, and this nurse in the room. And they took care of me. Like, who in the world gets the privilege of your own mother telling you what happened? And the fact that we got an answer so quickly
Yeah.
is such a blessing. Not even a blessing, it's like a mercy, a small mercy in the midst of all of this.
Yeah.
So then we're trying to make sense of it. I'm looking at him, and like I said, he looks so much like our second daughter. I was like, oh my gosh. Like his little sweet face and everything. And he was almost exactly 6 pounds. He was long, he was healthy. Like, this is a full-term child that should have been alive.
Yeah.
All children at any stage should be alive, but I'm like, a baby, a regular sized baby.
Yeah.
So then later the chaplain comes in and does some really kind, wonderful prayers for us. And they had a cuddle cot at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't have photographers come in though. They talk about the now I lay me down to sleep. They couldn't come in because of COVID. So we just had our like Canon camera, and the nurses took photos, which is wonderful,
Yeah,
and
nice.
did all that stuff for us and documented it as much as they could. And I was holding him on and off, but they wrapped him up right away. And I was like, he doesn't need a bath or anything like that. I'm like, let's leave his tender, sweet body alone, because he was actually in really, really good shape. But it's hard to see like little things on the skin or certain spots.
Yep.
Like, it's just really, really painful to see your child that way. So I'm like, let's just respect his body and leave it alone. And for anyone that wants to do all the other stuff too, like, great, whatever. Like, parents should get to do whatever they need in the hospital, but I just was feeling really compelled just to kind of let his body rest.
That's good.
So thank goodness we didn't have to decide whether or not we were going to have an autopsy because we knew what happened.
Yeah, I can't. That is such a blessing. I keep thinking about that and how she just said those words of just like, I knew, like I
knew it. Yeah.
And
it was like she was whispering it to herself.
Really?
And then she explained it to me.
Did she show you the cord or anything, or she just kind of explained it to you?
I don't think they did.
Okay.
I wanted to see my placenta because I was curious about that. And with gestational diabetes, they always try to study the placenta, and it looked fine.
Oh, okay.
But I don't remember seeing the cord. I remember asking her about it later, which makes me think I didn't see
Yeah.
the knot. But I mean, the other midwife looked at it and said, "Oh yeah, here's what it was." And we later had the placenta autopsied, and they said based on that, like there was a cord injury, and not
Oh,
an injury, but a knot. It was a
yes.
true knot, is what they called it, and this is what happened.
That is crazy. It's always like baffling. Like, how does that happen? Like,
Yeah. What my mom said to me, she's like, "Your baby's an acrobat." It probably was sometime in between like weeks 10 and 20. He was moving around in there and got himself like cross-throughed and tied. And just as he gets bigger and bigger, it's not that they run out of room, but that's when things start compressing.
right.
So that's what happened. And they said based on like my fluids and what shape he was in, they're like, this has happened like within the past 24 hours, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Because they said, I had that appointment on Friday, and they're like, even if you thought something was wrong over the weekend and you came in, we probably wouldn't have caught this
Because it happened so kind of
quickly.
suddenly.
Yep.
Oh,
So, but it's just like, of all the things, like it is quite a miracle that any of us are here because of so many things that can go wrong in pregnancy. But trying to be like this freak accident
yeah.
has now resulted in Jacob not being alive.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It's hard to even describe.
Yeah.
Because we had all these plans. This is how it's gonna go. And he was born at 4 something in the morning on May 4th. So it's not a bad day to be born. He
No.
made it to our Star Wars day. So, but then we're just in shock, trying to call family and friends. All the lovely questions they start asking you in the hospital as to funeral arrangements.
Yes. Yes.
Something I learned is we live in Iowa, yet this baby was born in Nebraska, and there are rules about state lines.
Oh,
Yeah, which in terms of transportation of bodies, which sounds
yeah.
gruesome, but that's how they explained it. So we worked with 2 funeral homes, and it actually wasn't too hard to coordinate because the hospital was really helpful. We decided that we wanted him cremated.
Okay.
So we arranged for a funeral home in Omaha to come pick up his body, and they were so wonderful and kind and sweet. And we're on like this funeral home's probably about 10 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were leaving the next day, I'll kind of get to that. They're like, please text us as soon as you walk out of the room, and we are immediately going to the hospital to get his body so he's not going to be alone.
I love that.
I know. Just like the kindness and compassion and consideration. Like I've listened to this podcast and have heard stories about what's happened, like running the whole gamut. And I realize how much like humanity and compassion we receive.
Yes. Yeah.
And we arranged a viewing for the rest of the grandparents and immediately family members to be able to go see him before he was cremated. David and I didn't go. My mom didn't go because we all had time with him
Yeah.
in the hospital. But I'm really happy we were able to provide that opportunity to our family
That's
for
good.
their grief and their process.
Yeah.
The girls never came to the hospital, and they didn't go to the viewing. We just didn't. We just made the decision that we have pictures and we'll talk to them about Jacob. But I was just worried about all the stress they were going to go through to begin with. I really didn't want to confuse or scare them, to be
Yes.
honest. So they weren't a part of it. David left that same morning and went home to be with the girls. I had a night with him
Okay.
next to me where I was sleeping and I could look at him and I could touch him and I could hold him. And he had the softest skin, the sweetest, softest skin. And I'm not going to get time with my child. Like that night, those hours feel sacred to me. I could be with him. He was tangible. I could hold him. I could love him. I could talk to him. So, really, really grateful we had that. And then David and I each the following morning kind of said our goodbyes together and separately so we could all have moments. And then I just remember the nurses like taking him out of the room And I'm like, this is the last time I am going to see my child. So yeah, it's just like brutal. And
It
like I said, this was all like less than 24 hours.
yeah, brutal is the perfect word because you feel like, why, how can I give up my baby that I spent so much time with, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. And we had plans for him.
yeah,
He was supposed to come home with us.
yeah.
Oh, and the thing too, there were some arrangements to be made. So as soon as I left the hospital, we immediately drove to the funeral home. I was like, what is my life right now? And then we went home and like family and friends were coming into town by that point and checking in on us. And it was nice to see the girls, but coming home without your baby, what is that?
Yeah. It's unnatural. It just is so horrible.
Yeah, it's like every reflex you have in the world as a parent wants to take care of your baby. And I had my two older babies, of course, which I'm grateful for, but where's my baby that I'm supposed to be taking care of?
Yeah.
He's not here. Yeah.
Becky, I am wondering, can you tell me about how you named him? How
Yes.
I do want to know about his name
Yeah.
and how that occurred because I think David did not know until he was born that he was going to be a boy.
Correct. Um, so we had come up with a list of girl and boy names.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I knew this was a boy
Yeah.
when we were coming up with girl names. Didn't feel great, but I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I mean, Jacob had been our boy name for the first two pregnancies too.
Oh,
We really
okay.
liked it. It
Yes.
was just kind of the name we've had in mind. And Raymond is David's grandpa.
Oh,
It's also David's middle name.
okay.
And I actually have some grandfathers and great grandfathers on my side too who just happen to be named Raymond.
That's perfect.
So it just felt like a really nice mix of
Yeah.
both of our families. So we love Jacob, and it just seems to fit him so well, and just Raymond made sense.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
wonderful. Was
yeah.
David pretty excited? Was he I guess what was his reaction when
Oh yeah.
he was
I
born?
mean, just shock and utter devastation. I love so many things about David. I love that he has his emotions and expresses them. And as painful as it was to see this complete shock and heartache, like the tears he cried for his son, it's so hard. And it was such a beautiful testament, too. Like, I'll be honest, we don't care a whole lot about like biological sex. We say we're, gender neutral and this and that. Like, straight up, we were excited to have a boy.
Yeah.
And like that had been David's hope all along. Because
Yeah.
as much as like with my girls, I think about mother daughter stuff, of course he's thinking about father son stuff
Oh, yeah.
too.
Yeah, for
And has
sure.
wanted this so badly. So he's just holding him and crying and talking to him. And I remember he kept saying, "Hey, buddy," like just talking to him that way. I'm like, how can you attend to yourself and see your spouse's heartbreaking at the same time? And like, my mom is taking care of me and also holding her grandchild. Like, so I'm just trying to think about everyone in the room, but also just seeing David. And it was hard for him to be there, understandably so. So he ended up heading home that night
Yeah.
to be with the girls, which I think was really good for him. And then, like I said, my mom and I had the night with him, and then David came back the next day, and that's when we kind of we left together at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was awful.
Yeah.
It was heartbreaking. We were trying to take care of each other, and we're also just crying and completely devastated.
Yeah. It is so yeah, I am so sorry. It just is so awful. It's so awful.
Yeah, it is. It is pain that can't even be fully articulated.
Yeah.
Part of it feels like animalistic almost. It's that painful.
Yeah.
And just like the physical pain too. I don't think people often realize or think about like the physical pain associated with this grief.
Yeah.
Because luckily physically my recovery was okay. Like I wasn't having it was a vaginal birth, my first two were vaginal births, like I knew the process, I knew how my body healed, like that all felt okay. It was just the other physical pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because it really is true. I just remember my chest just aching and my
Oh, yes.
stomach felt like I'd just been kicked in the stomach. It was just awful.
The worst. Yeah, especially in the chest. You try to
Yeah.
breathe in and it hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause you're missing somebody that's so important.
I know. No, and he's just supposed to be here with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. Oh,
So you went to the funeral home and after you guys left and
yep. Yep.
made
So
arrangements, which is you just are like, how am I so young and are arranging a funeral?
yeah. Yeah. It's
That's,
hard to make sense of. And I never had been directly involved in all of the funeral planning, but like I said, our family unfortunately is not a stranger to
yeah.
grief. And my brother died in 2015.
Oh,
And I just remember that shock and driving across the state and trying to come up with plans and knowing all the questions that like funeral directors ask. And
yeah.
I mean, they were very kind and considerate, and we could kind of put stuff together. We're Catholic, so we knew we were going to have a mass.
Mhm.
So just trying to put the readings together and this and that, we were able to do all of that because he was born on Tuesday. His
Mhm.
viewing was on Wednesday, and for family and everything to get into town, we had the funeral on Saturday.
Okay. So a few
He
days.
was he was cremated by that point. I remember my dad took me to Omaha on like Thursday or Friday because we had to go pick Jacob up. I was like, I remember texting my friend at work who was just talking to me. I'm like, "Do you want me to tell you what my life looks right now? I am literally driving to a funeral home to pick up the ashes of my child." And she's just like, "Yeah, this isn't even a world you should be having to exist in
Yep.
right now." And I said, "Yeah."
Yeah.
So, but just the whole week, it's so surreal.
Yeah.
And then just the outpouring of love we received.
Yeah.
And like, it is not lost on me that we were actually able to have a funeral because this is still in the pandemic.
Right.
And
Very much in the pandemic.
so many families have not been able to grieve and process and heal. And yeah, we're all masked and being really careful. And I was so grateful that people showed up for us
Yeah.
and could be there to support us and love us. And, fun fact, the day before and the morning of the funeral, my milk decided to come in.
Oh.
So let's just put that pain on top of it all. And I remember like I don't want to hug it
Yes.
hurts to touch people, to
Yep.
like hug people. And I just, how they give you a bunch of Tylenol and stuff. I just took what I was supposed to, and that took the edge off a little bit, which was nice. But
But still, it is painful for several days.
yeah, it's really painful. Like hunching over like you don't even want to walk
Yeah.
because it hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that people don't realize that there's kind of this aftermath too. Like all the natural things that your body does and is
Yeah.
doing to take care of this baby that is not there is
Mhm.
has no place to go. And you're like, this is so cruel. It feels so cruel.
It's salt in the worst wound.
Yeah.
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 Let's just add, and like you can't be mad at your body for doing what it thinks it's supposed to be doing,
Mhm.
but really, really, universe,
Yeah.
like, thanks so much.
Can we
This is
help?
what
Yeah.
I'm dealing with.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely.
Mhm.
So you I'm wondering how did you end up telling your daughters? I know that you mentioned that you end up
Yeah.
telling them
Yeah.
and how did that
Yeah.
go?
Like I said, they were just being sweet and sitting at the table and eating their lunch. And I don't know if it's my psychologist training too, but I'm very much a proponent of like, don't sugarcoat things, just
Yeah.
say the facts and then try to explain it. And I said, the baby died. And then I said, "This is why, this is how we're feeling, how are you feeling?" But I just said the words,
Yeah.
and I don't like I was like, "I just have to get this out, and I'm not gonna, like, try to," and people can tell children however they want, but for me, I was like, "I just need to tell them the facts." That's very much kind of how we operate in this family. We're very,
Mhm.
like, emotionally centered and caring for one another, but, like, we're gonna be upfront with how we communicate.
Right.
So I just said, "The baby died."
Yeah. And then when you came home, did you kind of tell them a little bit about what happened or how the birth went and
Yeah,
all that?
yeah. We had had a couple, like, FaceTime calls and things in the hospital.
Okay.
So I was trying to explain it to them, and this, like, is really sad, but also sweet. When I came in, you know how, like, your stomach's still extended?
Yeah.
Ellie came up and patted it and said baby. And I'm like, no, honey, baby's not in there. And just trying to help make sense of it. We had received a lot of books at the hospital. I have a lot of great mom friends in my life. I also have a lot of other people who are mental health providers and
Yeah.
started sending me books and like, here's things about how to talk to your kids and here's things to think about and like, here's what helped and just trying to do anything.
Right.
So we were able to have some conversations. We got a lot of books that I would just sit there reading with them and we'd all just cry together.
Oh.
Um, we got a a weighted bear
Oh, okay.
in the hospital.
Yeah.
So he arrived a couple days later, and we have a bunch of pictures of Maggie like opening the package with me. And I had bought one baby thing prior to knowing what everything happened. And like I said, I wasn't supposed to know the gender, but I did. So I got this really sweet little dinosaur onesie.
Oh.
Or like pajamas,
Yeah.
excuse me,
Yeah.
dinosaur pajamas. And we put him on Jacob there and like tried to do all the things and like cuddle him and take care of him and talk to him and all of that stuff.
Good.
So that's how we told the girls. And then we've just tried to be really intentional and as painful as these conversations are, to be really like upfront and open about it.
Yeah. It's very, I don't mature. Like, I think it's good that you've, kept
Yeah.
them involved and helped them with that.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, if I run to anything in life, it's perhaps more anxious than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if someone's going to give me bad news, please just tell me.
Yeah.
Like, don't like try to get around it because I will panic.
Yeah.
So maybe I was like that part too. I was like, let's just tell them.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So as you are preparing for the funeral and you go pick up Jacob at the funeral home, you went with your dad. Is that right?
Yeah.
How was that little trip?
Oh, here's the weird part about grief. On the way home, my dad, very helpful. He's like, you need like a new umbrella for your back porch because it was the summer and it was hot. So we go and pick him up, and then my dad and I are like wandering around Menards, and I'm like, seriously, what are we doing? So that's just kind of a funny side note. I think my dad was just really trying to be productive and help.
Yes.
But going there, what I didn't expect was how small the box was. And just being like, I can fit the ashes of my child in a really small container.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's so big and so momentous. And here he is in this tiny little box. It was awful.
Yeah.
And like I said, unfortunately, I've seen ashes before because I remember we had my brother cremated as well. And I remember his ashes. It was like 7 pounds of ashes in a big box. Clearly, he was like a 32-year-old tall, large man. But
Yeah.
still, I was expecting more ashes. And I was like, this is what 6 pounds of ashes look like. And they let me put some mementos in with him, like a couple just spiritual objects.
Yeah.
The uncle that I had mentioned that had died of COVID early when we found out we were pregnant with Jacob is actually a Catholic priest.
Oh,
And
okay.
he had given us a lot of little tokens and little like angel and prayer things. So I put a lot of those in there with Jacob. So, I mean, we had all that stuff in there and his clothes and this and that, but still like the tiniest box.
Yeah.
I was not expecting it to be so small. And it didn't minimize him, but that's kind of how it felt too.
Oh.
It was like the life of my child fits in my hands.
Yeah.
Ugh.
The box is the
box.
The box is so tiny and you're just like, this is all I have? This is it?
Yeah. This is him? There's no way that matches. Like just proportionally, it does not make sense.
Yeah. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So we actually have some friends. One is a very, very talented glass blower, and we've had conversations with him. He's going to make a really special urn for Jacob.
Oh.
In the shape of a raindrop, because we've kind of associated the rain and the thunder that came that night when I found out something was wrong kind of with him.
Oh.
It feels very like life-giving and very special to us. So that's like in production. And that's going to happen. So we're going to have that, and like the symbolism of rain will be really nice.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
And kind.
So kind. So kind. And that was overwhelming too, just the outpouring of love. So needed, but also overwhelming.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
You're like, how am I going to thank all of these people?
I know.
And
I know.
it is, we just realized how blessed we were. We
Yes. Yes.
super
Us too.
blessed.
Like that's actually a good point. When we went to the funeral home in Iowa, we had been notified that there's this organization in the town over where this woman runs a nonprofit where they pay for the funeral expenses for everyone,
Oh, that is
for
amazing.
families who have lost children because of her own journeys with loss. So we find this out, and it's so generous and beautiful and unexpected. And fortunately, my grandparents, Jacob's great grandparents, we're talking oh gosh, how old are they? I don't want to get it wrong. In their 90s and 80s,
Okay.
drove well, a family member brought them to the funeral, and my grandma just comes up to me. She's like, "Give me the bill. I'm writing a
Oh,
check. Your grandpa and I
oh,
want to take care of this for you." So I just and like my grandma, and like I remember talking to her. Her name's Margaret. Maggie's name, my
uh,
child's name is Margaret. I just remember telling her and just like looking at her, and like she didn't really say much, but this is a woman who has lived a lot of life, and she just held my hand and looked at me. So to be able to have that like source of comfort and support and all of that was really, really beautiful.
yeah. People love you so much. Like, I think it's so
Yeah,
wonderful how
so
much.
lucky. I'm so lucky. So yeah, and they all love Jacob
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
They want him here just as much as we do. So we were very well taken care of. Um, my mom stayed with me for about a month. I ended up taking a maternity leave.
Good.
It was really, really, really hard those couple weeks after. Like I felt like I was haunting myself because I was supposed to have this baby on the 26th.
Oh,
So those weeks in between, I'm like, I'm
yeah.
supposed to be pregnant right now. I'm supposed to be at work right now. I'm supposed to be going to these appointments. I'm supposed to be continuing to live the life I was supposed to. Like I really felt like I was haunting myself in the weirdest way, but that's how I could best describe it.
That sounds, yeah. When you say that, I was like, that is, yes, that is exactly how it feels. Cause you're just like,
Yeah.
Yeah, now what?
Where it's
Now what? Now
yeah.
what?
Yeah. And we ended up leaving town
Oh, good.
on my due date. We ended up going home. And David was able to come. His family was wonderful and giving him as much time off as they could. But like farming's a 24/7
Yeah.
job, so they were really coming together to help support us. And the morning he was, like I said, I remember things. The morning he was supposed to be born, the morning I was supposed to go in for my induction, there's the town I'm from is called Scottsbluff, Nebraska, out in the western part of the state.
Uh-huh.
And there is a bluff called Scottsbluff. And I was like, David, let's get up super, super early. We are going to hike to the top of this because I need to do something. Like
Oh,
I need to move my body.
yeah.
This morning is going to be awful. And we got up early enough that we got to watch the sunrise together.
Oh,
And it was beautiful. Was like, we have to do something. I can't just sit here because I know what this day is supposed to be. So we did. And it was really, really nice. And it was just the two of us.
I bet it was quite a tender and sad moment.
Yes. All of those things.
Oh man, I'm so, so sorry.
Yeah. Thanks. And like, once you know a pain that deep, like knowing other people who have had this pain, it just breaks your heart all over again because you know what it feels like.
Yeah.
No one should have to feel this.
Yeah.
No one should have to hold their dead child in their arms. That's just not the way the world's supposed to work.
That's not the way it's supposed to be. And unfortunately, it happens
It,
more
ha-
often than we'd like it to do.
it happens, and I remember too thinking what a blessing. As busy and chaotic as having a 5-year-old and 3-year-old feels like, they were literally keeping us moving.
Yes.
Their sweetness, their need for routine, their kindness really, really helped David and I keep our heads on. So we were so grateful for them too, and to have living children.
Yeah.
So they helped a lot.
I'm so sorry, Becky.
Thank you.
It's unfair.
It is really unfair.
Becky, is there anything else that we've missed that you'd like to talk about? I know there's so much.
I know.
I always want to capture these last little, like, anything that you might remember. There's so many
Yeah,
things that
so many yes. Let me think about this. I had my sister-in-laws were taking care of me. They actually got framed some of my maternity pictures with him,
oh, good.
girls, and got some really nice things put together and just little sweet mementos and gifts. And I was grateful that I was able to take maternity leave. I was grateful that I had my
Yes.
mom, and I just needed so much to heal by sitting and crying and writing and trying to figure out what was happening. And I would be remiss to not give a huge shout out to my beloved, sweet therapy pet called my cat Cora. She just slept with me and I laid in bed and she was just there and she was something to hold and love and just
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks. Thanks all the pets that have helped us get through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just
And people were so kind and wonderful. And I was surprised by even some of the people that reached out and really, really took care of us. To be honest, I was a little bit hurt by the people who didn't because it seemed really obvious that they would have and they didn't. I had a lot of really, not a lot, but I had a couple really, really close friends that were pregnant at the same time as me.
oh,
Like, this is a worst nightmare scenario
yeah.
for anyone. And the fact that in their pregnancies, they reached out and were taking care of me while also dealing with probably whatever sort of feelings they were having. I
Yes.
just have so much respect. And I would just really want to thank them because, women know if women are fortunate enough and want it, they know what it feels like to be pregnant.
Yes.
And for something like this to happen, you just don't even want to go there
Nope.
thinking about it.
You
And they
don't
were
want to
able to
imagine.
show up for me in ways that I could imagine was really, really hard. So I'm just so grateful to them too.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And just Jacob's perfect. He's perfect. He's everything we wanted. And we just love him so much and always will. And I think about our family members that are in heaven with him and my brother who gets to take care of him for me. And there's aunts, there's uncles, like he's in good hands. If he can't be in our hands, at least he's in good hands.
That was perfect, Becky. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. Of course, there's like 500 more things to say, but this is what's most important. Just saying how wonderful and perfect Jacob is.
Yeah.